Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood, and in this episode, I am joined by Lesley Woods. Lesley is a senior Royal Air Force Reserve media officer, and she has some wonderful stories to tell us about the challenges of working in the military, of the stories that need to be told, of connecting people, of thinking about how you can remove your ego in the situation and work together to achieve the outcome and have the impact that you are looking for. And what we found throughout this conversation is, even though these examples are from the military and from some pretty hairy situations that Lesley has been in herself, is that there are so many lessons that can be learnt from here that are applicable everywhere, wherever you work, whatever your situation is. It's just looking at how do you take that advice and apply it wherever you are. I really enjoyed recording this episode. I hope you enjoy listening to it. Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I am delighted today to be joined by the wonderful Lesley Woods. But rather than me introduce Lesley, I'm going to hand over to you. Can you tell us who you are, what you do, and tell us a little bit about your career story and how you got to where you are today?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Beth. I am a third generation woman in the military, so I'm a military media officer. And I like to go around and sort of share my stories because there aren't many of us that are out there. Many people don't identify with aircrew and know that the sort of female fast jet pilots and helicopter pilots, they don't realise that actually there's a military media officer job. So I like to go about and share and sort of chat about my adventures and things like that, and just sort of, share some lessons in my adventures in the hope that those tips and techniques might help other people.
Amazing. And I've got so many things to ask you about how this all came about. So you're third generation military woman. So that is unusual in itself, I imagine. What was the inspiration for you to move in and become part of the military? And specifically, actually, but in this kind of media role, which is something that you probably don't think about when you think about the military.
So my maternal grandmother drove ambulances for the ATA in World War II. It's how she met my granddad, who was in the army, which is quite nice. And then my mum and my father met in the Royal Air Force. So mum was a dental nurse and dad was a nurse, a medic nurse. So they met in the Royal Air Force. My uncles, my granddads, everybody's either been in the army or the Air Force, but all as medics and engineers. So when I decided that I wanted to do this thing called media, what does it do? How does it work? We don't understand. It doesn't fix people, but it does share stories, and obviously it shares the stories of the people that did all the engineering and the medical stuff, which is quite cool. So I come from a long line of that sort of history, and growing up with all the memorabilia and the hats and the uniforms and the trinkets and the treasures from everywhere around the world that ended up in my bedroom. I used to nick them all from my parents. It kind of just sort of like you find your way in. I mean, I joined as an air cadet when I was a little kid. I was the first ever female cadet warrant officer for my unit that I joined. And I just thought, this is quite cool. I quite like the uniform. I quite like bouncing around, quite like airplanes. And it just kind of it went from there, really. And I find myself here in my late 40s, somehow of having a career in the blink of an eye, which is quite scary.
It's so interesting. And I always think you either go two ways when you have a big legacy of a particular industry, don't you? You either go, I'm really excited by this, I'm really into it, or you go, I don't want anything to do with the things that my parents or family did for years and years and years, like the whole family business thing. How did you start off? What did you do first of all, obviously beyond your air cadet thing? How did you get into it in the first place?
So I always wanted to do journalism and public relations. I think my mum tells the story that my first word was why. And I've been kind of saying, why? Why does this thing? Why can't I do that? Why does this thing happen? What's wrong with that? And so I was always sort of going around and sort of interviewing people from a young age. And my little brother rocked up 5 years after me. Ironically, as you say, he wanted nothing to do with the military. And the frustrating thing is that my parents gave him the name Robert Andrew Francis, RAF Woods. I know. And there's Dad. I've got a son to follow me into the family business. Little did he know. So it's a bit weird. So I think from there I was just sharing stories and going around. I didn't actually join the regular RAF because there was no permanent job that did this kind of thing. They're all reservists. And so what I did was I went off and developed a civilian career. So I worked for the Eastern Daily Press, Global Media, Heart FM, as they are now, spent quite a bit of time bouncing around in sort of media outlets, learning my trade, if you like. And then I realised that you could actually join the RAF as a reserve media officer. That was kind of an accidental find, really. And then from there, it was kind of an obvious game changer for me. I'm going to do that as well. So I left doing media jobs, moved into the military, realised I loved it so much that I then went and got a job in the Ministry of Defence. And so I now have two jobs. I work in the Ministry of Defence, Directorate of Defence Comms, as well as being an RAF media officer. So it's kind of like a busman's holiday. They're very similar jobs, just with different outfits in different places around the world.
You have to be in a different uniform depending on which one you're representing.
Yeah, you do. Basically, I've got it's a bit messed up upstairs in my house, actually, because you've got like wardrobes of green stuff, wardrobes of blue stuff, wardrobes of civilian suits, and then my accessories cupboards of which combat boots do you want to wear today? Yes, when you go away on a big exercise, or if you go somewhere where you actually need more than one type of uniform, you find yourself becoming very OCD with wardrobes, as in hang these shirts here, hang those shirts there. They can't touch, obviously. And you have to hang them all up. And I must admit, I feel more comfortable in this what we call the combat PJs, the green outfit. That's the sort of the working outfit. That's the one that you wear when you're running around the world flying and hanging out helicopters. It's the cool one. But not many people recognise the blue suit. They don't understand that actually you can have a normal working uniform as well. So lots of outfits upstairs, lots of choice.
Lots of outfits, and choosing the right thing for the right day. We'll come back to that when we talk a bit more about some of the stuff that you do. For us non-military people who are listening, including myself, can you tell us a bit about the difference between being enlisted and being a reservist? What does that mean?
So when you are a regular, you join up and it is your full-time job, and you normally commit a period of your life, however many years, whether you're going to join as an officer or as someone in the ranks. When you join as a reservist, you commit a minimum of, I think it's 27, 28 days a year, depending on what service you join and what unit you're doing. And those days can be spent in just about anything. You can be going around the world on military exercises, military operations. And for me, it's telling the story of wherever the Royal Air Force is. So whatever jobs we are doing, there's always usually one of my team there with a recorder, with a camera, with a notebook and pen, going old school. Whether we're tweeting or writing feature pieces or making documentaries. So it's very much a go wherever the Air Force is going, you go with them and you tell their story. And that's when it can get into the slightly dangerous and sporty environments where you wouldn't be able to send a normal journalist from a civilian company.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I understand that now. So it's kind of like a part-time fixed-term contract gig if we were looking at the corporate world for your reservist world.
It's two jobs. So you have your permanent full-time job, one that pays the bills, and then you have your other job, which is more like it's not a hobby. And I always get a bit sort of annoyed when people say, "Oh, you've got this hobby of being in the military." No. It's full on. It's just part-time service. So one of the old adverts for the reserves used to say twice the citizen, because you still serve your country, you still take all the same risks, and you still have to go through all the training. And you collect medals and you collect adventures and you get shot at along the way, etc. But you're just doing it part-time, not full-time. The same way that I guess people that do when they do volunteer fire service or, they do the same with the police force. You can still do it part-time as well as full-time.
Wow, amazing. Thank you for explaining all that to me. So I got it clear in my mind. So tell me a little bit about, you say, you're going on these adventures. Like, I'm kind of so drawn to the adventure side of life. Adventures, going out with people, being you said something about kind of hanging out of aeroplanes or helicopters. I'm like, okay, this sounds like fun. But this is, you're so right, this is a job that I don't think I would ever known existed until I spoke to you. So one thing I always say about all these different industries, all these different places, there are so many jobs we don't know about. There are so many opportunities and interesting things that we could be doing, but knowing that they're there is half of the battle. And I love the fact that you say your job is about telling the stories of the RAF and what's going on there. So can you tell us a couple of stories about some of the things that you have done in your work that are interesting, different, are exciting, are scary? Because I imagine there's some scary stuff that went on there as well.
Yeah, so I've got a few interesting sporty ones. I can tell you the story about how I found my purpose, how I knew I was in the right job and doing what I was meant to do.
Yes, do that.
If I go back to 2010, so I was to go to Afghanistan back when we were still out there in quite big numbers for the British military. And I was due to go out there to cover Christmas. So I was flying on my own, flying the week before Christmas with my little rucksack, one-woman media team, all my cameras and my microphones and notepads in it. bit of tinsel, a few Santa hats, all the stuff you need for Christmas telling. Went out there and landed in my little media office and went around thinking, great, everybody's going to come and chat to me. I was recording Christmas messages for the media. You guys might have seen them on TV when you sort of turn on Good Morning Britain or anything like that, and it says, hi, I'm Bob, I'm in Afghanistan. I'd like to say hello to my lovely wife, Julie. So I was out there to record all of those messages, and I thought, this is going to be great. People are going to be queuing up to see me, and no single person wanted to go near me. So I hadn't basically badged on the fact that most of the military don't like the media, and they certainly don't like being on TV, and they will do pretty much anything they can to avoid it. And so what I was doing was going around with a camera saying, hey, do you want to record a Christmas message? And they were legging it the other way.
Running actively away from you.
Yeah, actively. I could actively clear an aircraft hangar or a mess hall or anything just by walking in with a little badge on my arm saying media officer and a camera in my hand, which is a dead giveaway. And they would leg it the other way. So I went to see the Padre. So I need some help, Padre. You're really good at finding people and finding stories. So I basically teamed up with the military Padre who can get in, access all areas. So I was effectively, because of God's right-hand woman that day, which is quite nice, sort of going around with him. And he helped introduce me to a few people. And he found me a couple of volunteers. I'm putting sort of air quotes around that. We call it voluntold in the military when you get told to volunteer for something. So I did a couple of them, sent them back to the UK, and they went out on air. They went out on TV, on radio. And I thought nervously, they're either going to hate it and I'm going to get loads of stick, or I'm going to have people actually come and see me. And the next morning when I went in from my tent to my media office, I had a door full of Post-it notes. You have like one of those little scribbly notice boards where you can say when you're in. That was covered in messages. And I had a queue of people. And I'm like, what's going on? This doesn't look good. I've done something wrong. And they all wanted to, apparently, the wives of the chaps whose TV sessions I'd done had seen them, had gone on Facebook and said, you were amazing. Little Johnny loved seeing you on TV. When are we going to see more of this? Why don't you get your friends to do it? And so, of course, the power of the families, which I'd underestimated, was please come and put yourselves on TV. So I became this person that could connect the families across the miles at a very important time when parents were missing their kids' Christmases. And I was so busy, but it was so valuable and so rewarding, and I absolutely loved it. And I could really understand the benefit of just one person who's able to help others share their story to greater effect. Just like that in 1 week. And I knew I was in the right job from then.
I love that. And I do think sometimes there are these moments, aren't there, in our careers where we're like, oh, yeah, that's the thing. That's what I'm here for. That's why I do what I do. And we kind of have to be ready to notice those things. And sometimes they're not massive, are they? Sometimes they're just, okay, I've just connected all the dots between these things. It was there already, and I'm just noticing now what it is that happens here. And I'm a little bit like, oh, it's so sweet, isn't it? Being able to give messages to people's families when they're away from home, when they're in dangerous situations, when they've been away for months or years at a time. What a lovely thing to be able to go and do.
It really was, and I think it kind of helps you understand that one person can make a difference. And that all of the people who join the military just say, I'm just doing an ordinary job, but they are absolutely extraordinary people. And it's never about me. It's never about the media officer. It's always about them. And I remember there's a couple of quotes in Brené Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, where she talks about having the courage to walk alongside somebody else and share their story, not yours. So it really does. You really do have to sort of park your own ego and sort of, you'll never see a byline. You'll never see my name against a story, but I might have written it. It's just that I've shaped it and sent it in, and the journalist has picked it up, tops and tailed it, and gone, thanks very much, that's nice, I'll have that. And it's got to the point now where family and friends can read stories online in newspapers and go, is that one of yours? And I'm like, it might be.
I cannot confirm or deny.
Exactly, it may have been me, particularly if it's got... I was once very famous for being sort of like the dog correspondent, if you like, the military working dog correspondent. There was a whole influx of them went out to Afghanistan and other places, and I went with them. So literally telling the RAF story, to the point where I actually media-minded one of the RAF police dogs at Crufts FM, would you believe? Which is the highlight of my career, media-minding a dog. But he was very good.
I mean, seriously, I think you might have just said what my dream dog is. So my dream job is dogs, right?
Yeah,
so actually,
minding dogs.
That sounds amazing. Like, you get to go and be the dog correspondent. Like, that's an actual thing that somebody does as a job. You did that as a job. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you talk to the handlers as well, but you do have to sort of spend time with the dog, hope that the dog doesn't attack you or savage you, to the point where they find it. The thing about a media officer is that when you get sent one, if you're in the military, you try and play with it. I think it sounds really, really wrong, but when you get sent to somewhere like the fire service, they go, great, we need someone to dress up and be our stooge and to play all the things for us. And so they'll dress you up in the giant flame retardant suit and set fire to you just as a practice. And all the time you're recording it. Yeah, it's absolutely great. And then when you go and do search and rescue with the helicopter force, they'll dress you up in the giant wetsuit and drop you in the North Sea and winch you up, all in the name of practicing. So you get some great content, but it can be a bit hairy.
Yeah. So obviously so you've got connecting families, you've got sending the messages across the ether to people at home, Christmas time, like feel good, amazing. You've got probably the best job I could ever do, which is be a dog correspondent. I can go and talk to the dogs.
Yes.
I would love that. Can you tell us about some of the more tricky, challenging situations? And obviously only ones that you're allowed to talk about as well.
So I did once save the life of Julie Etchingham, ITV News at 10 correspondent.
Right, tell us about this, because that's quite a big claim.
So we were out filming Women on the Front Line, a documentary about all the different roles that women can have in the Royal Air Force and the British military when they're out and about on operations around the world. And so I'd gone with her because I was the only female media officer, and she wanted an all-female team. And we were following a female firefighter, a female police person, female air traffic controller. And it was the night that one of the neighbouring camps in Afghanistan caught fire. So there'd been a sort of a fuel depot leak/spill, and there'd been a fire that caught, and it raged through the night. And it got quite bad to the point where we'd been filming. And of course, ITV cameramen's like, oh, this is interesting over here. Let's go and film this big smoke plume over here. That looks like dramatic. And so, you are effectively ambulance chasing. You're going straight into the fire. We didn't know how big it was. And then we couldn't get out again. And so I was left responsibility for 3 people plus myself, because you're not just the media officer that drives them around, gets the camera in the right place. You're their life support. You have to look after them and try and keep them alive. So I was trying to find somewhere that I could shelter them that weren't sort of getting in the way of what was happening with the fire. And at the same time, a dust storm had hit, and dust storms out in Afghanistan are quite epic. You can't see your hand in front of your face. It just blows the sand everywhere. And so I found this nearby tent, and I thought, right, get them in the tent, toggle it all up, zip it all up, protect them from the dust. It's all fine. Went in there. It was a US Marine Corps base that we'd accidentally stumbled onto in the dark. And it was a toilet tent, and there was a guy sat there doing it, number 2, reading Stars and Stripes, and this massive ITV camera crew, Lesley, in a little outfit, rocks up. Hi, we're so sorry to come into your tent. I mean, literally, this guy was just doing a poo. And I toggled the tent up and protected us all, and thought, this is great. We'll be safe here. We'll wait out the dust storm. And the tent started to get a bit hot and fill up with a bit of smoke, which is obviously a bad thing. So I went back to the door and I thought, I'll undo the toggles, like these giant white, big industrial sort of tents, if you can imagine them. Undo the toggles and go for the zip. And I couldn't do the zip. It was too hot and it started melting. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I turned around, and the faces of the 3 guys, Julie Etchingham, the producer, and the cameraman, looking at me in sort of abject horror, like we're going to die in a toilet tent. And I was like, nope, not on my watch. We're not going to die in a toilet tent on my watch. And so we emptied our pockets. And it's one of the most important leadership lessons that my dad taught me. Empty your pockets, share your resources, and calm yourself down by looking at what you physically got in front of you. So very much like mindfulness, emptying your pockets. And I found in one of my pockets the penknife that he'd given me before I deployed. And he'd actually given it to me. And I remember his voice now. You'll always need to carry a penknife in case you ever have to cut yourself out of a burning tent. And I was like, well, I don't know
what.
I do not know what you mean, Dad. When I graduated in my posh outfit, I didn't know what it was on about. But here I was, stuck in a burning toilet tent, no less. And I got my little penknife out, and I started stabbing the inside of the sort of tarpaulin, if you like. I wasn't getting very far, but it was enough of an action for the people outside to realise there was somebody in there trapped. And then this sort of, you're getting this massive, great big, call that a knife, this really big knife came through the other side and sort of cut open the opening. And this guy looking like Close Encounters of the Third Kind came in, US Marine Corps firefighter, all these torches on his head, did the whole kind of sort of Arnie thing where you reach your hand through and say, come with me if you want to live. And then so we snuck through the opening, and I think he had me over one shoulder, one other guy had Julie over the other shoulder, and then the chaps running behind us, and we evacuated out to a slightly safer space. So I technically did save her life, if you want to play it that way.
So you saved the life of 4 people that day. 5, including yourself, because it was those 3, the guy who was having a poo,
yep,
and you.
Yep. And none of us died. Yep, all got through it.
Amazing. Now, I'm loving the leadership lesson here, though. Empty your pockets. What resources do you have? How can you share them? What can you do with it? Because the other thing that does, as well as, practically, oh, look, there's a penknife, that could be helpful. It focuses your attention away from the drama that's going on in your head.
Yes.
Away from worst case scenario, going, okay, what's the next practical thing we can actually do here?
And it is something that you can you take away responsibility from yourself. So yes, emptying your pockets. Emptying your pockets is a really good sort of tip and trick to take the responsibility out of your head and get you into the scenario of what's actually happening. So are you responsible for just you? Are you responsible for other people? And you can almost sort of see the switch flicking between, it's not just about me anymore. I have to look after other people. And looking after other people, they call it showing up in the service of others, actually takes a hell of a lot of pressure off you. If it had just been me in a burning tent, sat in the corner, I may well have just started rocking backwards and forwards and saying wibble in a corner. But I didn't have that luxury because I had 3 other people, 4 if you include Mr. Pooh, looking at me and wanting some, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to get out of here?
Yeah.
So, that's where officer leadership training kicks in, because people will look to you. If you've got a bigger barcode on your chest because you're a senior officer, they will look at you and go, what do we do? Okay, right, I've got to come up with an answer, if for them, if not just for myself. So it is a really good leadership tip.
And in this situation, you weren't even with other military people, were you? You're with civilians who don't have that kind of training.
Well, I don't know.
Goes up.
I don't know to this day what rank Mr. Pooh was. I never met him again. I think he's probably too embarrassed. So.
I mean, it is quite a moment, isn't it? Having a film crew.
Yeah. And
marching on you.
I mean, the actual documentary, when it was finished, was absolutely amazing. I mean, it wasn't, you kind of sort of talk about living through these fearful things. We'd eventually got into a little truck and I sort of managed to evacuate us out of the area, but it was quite sporty driving. And it wasn't until I watched the documentary footage back before it went on ITV that I was like, oh my God, I was actually in that. You can hear my voice off camera. I was actually in that. I actually lived through it. It's not when you sort of see it on the lens, you're kind of one step removed. When you actually see it for real, it's quite sobering. So yeah, it does make you think that there's a couple of times I might not have still been here, and that was one of them. But yeah, very hairy. I did lose half an eyebrow, and I got a bit singed, but no one died. And miraculously, there was a lot of damage on the camp from vehicles and tents, but no one died. There's a few smoke inhalation things, but we were very lucky that night.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's incredible that's actually your job to do that, and that situation occurred and that you managed to get everybody out. But that, I always think every tough situation has a lesson in it if you're prepared to kind of look at it. And the other side of that is, how cool is your dad knowing you'd need that tool one day? And how cool were you for keeping it rather than going, why on earth have I got this?
Do you know what? I mean, he's been gone 3 years now. He was an RAF wing commander. He died of lung cancer a few years ago. And he left me a giant box of memorabilia. And in it are all his photos from basic training, his rank tapes, all his kind of sort of awards and things like that. And there's no monetary value to it, but it's so precious. And I open it and sort of every so often and sort of look at it and imagine the stories that he didn't have time to tell me, and all of the things all of the lessons that he taught me about sort of how to survive in this kind of job have absolutely stood me in good stead. And I honestly didn't believe him when he said you might need it one day, put it on your belt. And thank the Lord that I actually had it in a pocket, because that's the good thing about the uniform. There's so many pockets, you can carry lots of things.
Yeah.
But you've got to be so careful what you do and don't carry. I also had in there my eye protection, which was really valuable, because when I got back to my tent, I looked at my boss. I was completely black with soot. I just had little white panda eyes where my goggles had protected my eyes from all the smoke and the dirt. So again, I never go anywhere without a pair of those now. So yeah, even commuting in London, you never know when you might need those.
You never know. In fact, you're probably quite likely to need them in London at some point in time.
Yes.
Even if just to get rid of the kind of pollen and hay fever and all that kind of stuff, that might work. I think it's really interesting what you're talking about here, and I'm trying to kind of relate it to outside the military and things that you might need to do, and having that benefit of somebody's wisdom that they have gained over experience, and that kind of idea of having a mentor. Now, you had one inbuilt, well, many of them inbuilt into your family because that's what they did and you kind of went into the same area. But actually anybody in any workplace, in any situation, in any new job, go and seek out some people who've done it, go and seek out the people who've done it for 20 years and who have got the battle scars to kind of prove it and can help you, find your way through and can help you get through some of the difficult challenges and help you understand what you might need in your toolkit to get that working for you.
That's exactly it. I don't know who was the original quote was attributed to, but there was somebody once said, never take advice from someone that hasn't walked the path you want to go down. And that's always stuck with me, in that, it's like people can say, oh, you don't want to be doing that. I'm like, well, have you done it before? Well, no. Okay, so please don't advise me. It depends entirely on where you want to go and what you want to do. And you'd be surprised. There's so many lessons from the military that are applicable in civilian life. I do actually spend quite a lot of time chatting with civilian colleagues and sort of, corporate companies, even some charities, just to sort of tell them through some of my adventures and share some of my stories in the hopes that they'll sort of pick up a few tips and tricks that can then serve them today. So it does translate, but yeah, it does sound a bit fantastical when I hear myself back. But yeah.
And the thing is, living through it, I imagine you're in the zone of like total adrenaline and working your way through it, and then recalling it back, it's like, actually, that was quite a big deal. It was quite a big deal.
We didn't get a lot of sleep. I think we were awake for something like, I think it was it 30 odd hours. We didn't get any sleep that night because obviously you're busy running around keeping yourself safe. And then I do remember coming down back to earth with a massive bang, because the next day when I had a shower and had a little bit of food, I got a call from the head of mechanical transport, MT. So the truck that I had borrowed to drive my media guys around, I'd had to abandon it because obviously it had fuel in it, and obviously as fuel gets hot, that's a bad thing. So I'd left it in an unidentified lane. I didn't know what part of the base I was on at this point in time. And the guy said to me, "You need to go and find the vehicle that you've signed for, get it back, clean it, and it better be working, or you're for the high jump, lovey." And I was like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna be in trouble over a truck." So I went to go and find this truck, and would you believe it, like a sort of mini act of God, this little truck was like in this little tiny patch of not scorched earth. Everything else was like black. This little truck was intact. It was filthy dirty. It was there. And I got it back. It worked. And the guy said to me, "Right, you can clean it now." So I thought, okay, I rolled my sleeves up, went out there, started cleaning it. And Julie and the other guys, also, she came out, she put a thing over her lovely blonde hair, and she started helping me clean the vehicle. And I thought, do you know what? There's a really lovely lesson in humility, that she's a well-known ITV news presenter, famous around the world for being on Sky and ITV. And because she knew it wasn't my fault, and because I'd used this truck to help us, she decided to come help me. So that was a nice lesson.
Such a lesson in like the power of connection and teamwork as well, isn't it? Is that actually help each other out, and because you've helped, you did save their lives, so it probably was, quite a nice thing to help you clean the car. But I love that kind of back down to earth from life saving. Can you clean this vehicle now? Thank you.
Yeah, because the military moves on very quickly. Like, yep, we survived that. Right, what's next? Crack on. It's like, oh my god, So. But yeah, I could have been potentially in a lot of trouble, because vehicles are very hard to come by, and they were, when you signed for them, you basically you're responsible for that truck, and so I don't want to think about what had happened if I'd gone and not been able to find it. So
yeah, well, number one, well done for finding it, and well done for sourcing it out. I think that's that's probably another lesson, isn't there, for beyond the military work, is like, just because you've had a big moment, like stuff still needs to happen. Yeah, you can't have a big moment and then say 3 months we're just not going to bother because we're just going to live off this high or this low. We're just going to carry on, find the next thing that you've got to do, and just get on and do it.
Well, there's a thing in the military called concurrent tasking, which I'm sure people will understand, in that you've got to have several things done at once. It's all about teamwork. It's like the only way you get through basic training is through teamwork. Now, the instructors won't teach you this. They just want to sort of throw you in the deep end and see if you can make it work for yourself. But when I went through basic training as slightly older, I was 33 when I did my officer training, 33. I'm now 47. And most of the younger lads that I was going through training with were sort of 19, 20, 21. So I wasn't quite their mum's age, but I was a lot older, slower. I'm only 5'6" almost. The kit is very heavy, very big to sort of put on and lug around. And when you've got to run around fields and climb over barbed wire fences and sort of pretend to be at war, I would tire very quickly, whereas they were sort of much younger, fitter, muscular chaps. And so we learnt the lessons of, if one of them carried my Bergen for a little while, then I would get the brew on and make him a cup of tea when we stopped for a rest. Or if one of them would actually help me through some of the big obstacle courses, I would help them study for a classroom-based test. And this is exactly what the instructors want to see. You've got to get several things done at once. So they only give you, say, for example, a 4-hour period in which you've got to eat a meal, clean your rifle, clean your kit, get your tent set up, and get all your stuff squared away for the next morning's prep. So you can't get all done in that period of time if you do it on your own. You can't. So you have to say, right, you know, Freddie McFred blogs, whatever your name is, you clean the rifle, someone else cleans the boots, someone else gets the dinner on, someone else puts the tent up. And they don't teach you this. You just have to learn it by doing. So, and I often think that's many civilian companies. People are, to go back to my earlier point about the ego, it's like, it's not just about you. You have to be able to park your ego and do it as a team. And if you don't get the credit, it doesn't matter, because ultimately you achieved success. The mission worked.
Yeah. So it's not about the individual success. It's about the kind of group success and achieving your mission, getting the right outcome, not dying in a tent, all of those things. And I think it's really interesting because what I would call that, if you were to break it down into kind of the learning side of life, is that's just strengths-based leadership. It's going and concurrent tasking together. It's going, hang on a minute, you can easily carry this backpack and still run at the same speed. I can run that fast, but not if I'm carrying stuff. Yeah. And actually, I'm really good at making a brew, so let me go and do that. Or I'm really great at putting a tent down, or I'm really great at cooking. And you use the stuff that you're good at. And if possible, I would say also that you're good at and you really love doing. Because if you've got that bit and you can all share in that, then you're going to get it done so much quicker, better, and in a good mood than you are if, I have to do this thing again because I'm on a list to do it.
Yes, and also it builds those sort of friendships and that camaraderie very, very quickly. In that, when I think about some of the training weekends I did through the winter, where you had to build your little, they call it a bivvy. Basically, you get like a tenty sheet thing, and you have to go and build a little den for you to sleep in. And it's snowy and it's cold outside, so you dig down to sort of the drier leaves. You build like a little foxhole thing. You put your little tenty sheet over the top at an angle so the rain can run off, and then you take all your kit off and you sort of pack it in there to try and keep it dry and warm. And then you curl around your colleagues like you're all little dormice in a burrow, and you get quite close quite quickly. So
I imagine you do. Tell us. You definitely said earlier, I know, like hanging out of a plane or a helicopter. Yes. Have you got a story about something that we could talk about there?
So if you go back and ask Carol Vorderman, she will tell you this was her best day at work ever. So a few years ago, we had the first ever F-35s, so the Harrier replacement. The first ever F-35s were coming across to the UK from where they're built in America to come into service with the Royal Navy and the RAF. And I was lucky enough to be able to go and do an airborne media facility. So I had borrowed, I had done this properly, I'd borrowed a US Air Force Hercules, which is the big one that's gone out of service now, where the ramp would go down and you could get quite close to the aircraft behind it. So it would refuel the jets. So I had the ramp down, the two refueling hoses were coming out the sides, plugging into the little jet planes behind. And when the ramp went down and I had a load of media on the back, I'm not kidding you could see the whites of the pilot's eyes. We were so close to them. And you were quite high up. And obviously the back going down, big blue sky outside, you have to be harnessed to the aircraft. You can't just wander around once you get out of your seat, because if you fall out, that's it, index, game over. So I was harnessed to the aircraft, and Carol was harnessed partly to me, partly to the aircraft. We were sort of moving down, edging slowly to the ramp. She sat on the edge of the ramp with a camera. She was filming for the BBC One show, and she was merrily sort of looking away, thinking this is great, because she flies herself. She's not fazed by high heights, etc. And I just remember sitting there and taking photos of her and thinking, I'm going to look back on this as a kind of really random thing that I did. And afterwards, she took me for a dinner in a local pub near the airfield, which is quite nice. But that was one of those ones where she had the most amazing day, and actually I lived a bit vicariously through her, because to me it was a bit blasé. I'd done it quite a few times, so it's quite nice to see something through the eyes of somebody else. You can actually remember that these things are special and that they are not adventures to be treasured.
Yeah, and you've just told me in the last 27 minutes, I think it probably is, 3 incredible stories about your work and the things that you've done in your work. And I can imagine we are just scratching the surface.
There's a few, but I won't bore you with all of them. I mean, the one that I really love, that I go back to a lot, which is personal sort of mental health and looking after yourself, is the night that I almost died was when I did a kitten puzzle, and it was the kitten puzzle that saved my life. And we were stuck on Kandahar airfield. It was another Christmas, would you believe? I'm that lucky that I get to go Christmas time. And the Taliban were bombing the airfield. They were sort of sending in bombs, sending in rocket attacks. and the alarm goes off and you have to hit the deck in your little office and you wriggle into your body armor and you have to lie there until you hear the all clear, the whole all clear sort of signal that goes around. And it can be a long time, and you can hear the bangs, you can hear the whiz, you can hear different things going on outside, and you don't know if it's going to land near you, on you, whatever. And all kinds of sort of thoughts go through your head. And again, because I wasn't alone in the room, I had a female photographer colleague, I couldn't panic. It wasn't about me anymore. And she really wasn't having a very good time. She was very, very worried that she wasn't going to see her young children again. She didn't want to die in that office block at Christmas time. And so I got down some of the gift boxes that had been sent to us by members of the public back home in the UK. Little old grannies had sent us sort of like, knitted scarves, and kids had written us messages, and we had sweets and we had chocolate. And I got down one box, and in it was a puzzle, and it was kittens with a ball of wool. And I got it out, and I thought, 1,000 pieces, right, this will keep us quiet. I'm not kidding you. We lay there and did this puzzle on the floor in full body armor, helmet, vest, all the rest of it, in this little sort of corner of the office, this little den that I'd made for her to sort of feel safe. And it was exactly what I used to do with my little brother when we were kids and there was a storm and you felt bad. You're trying to provide that psychological sense of safety for someone else to get you both through something a bit icky. And we did it, and we had the all clear. We hadn't finished the puzzle, but it served its purpose. She was starting to really panic. I was starting to lose it a bit, thinking, what do we do? And also, what if it comes down on the building and I have to go and help someone else, or someone else needs me to do medical? We'd all been medically trained, but you've never had to put a tourniquet on or anything like that in anger until something like that happens. And you think, what if I have to do the scary stuff I got trained to do? But that kitten puzzle, I don't know where it went. I left it behind for the next person after me, thinking I need to leave it as a present. But it was awesome. And that little old granny that put it in that parcel that night, I will always be grateful to her.
Yeah. Amazing. I have to say as well, I do like a puzzle, and I find them to be very good for my mental health. So I actually have one set up quite a lot of the time, just to kind of do for 10 minutes if your brain is feeling overwhelmed or stressed out or fearful, because you cannot concentrate on anything else other than where this piece goes. You can't. It's really hard to be thinking about other things. So whether you are in that situation of huge, horrible situation you're in, which is really dangerous, and actually the fear is genuine and really danger to you, but in work and in business, we feel that fear sometimes anyway, even when it's not a life-threatening situation. The fear response is still there.
Yes.
If we're scared about something that's coming up, if we've had a horrible conversation with somebody, if we think we've got this big thing that we're trying to go for and we don't think we're going to get it, there's fear is all around us all the time. Some of it's because there is physical danger, and some of it's because there's like mental, psychological, emotional, kind of social danger. So actually doing something that takes your brain off of that is a really good thing to do.
It really is. I mean, that's the thing, is that, having felt physical danger a couple of times in my life now, it's kind of, it's sort of it's reaffirmed for me how I cope with the psychological or the mental sense of danger instead, in that, when I've had to have difficult conversations at work, or when I've had conflict brought to me to resolve as the boss, and you just kind of think, hang on a minute, there's more than one way to cut this. And then what else can I do? What else can I do? Can I empty my pockets? Can I do a puzzle? What can I do? What can I do to help these things? Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine also there might be, tell me if I'm speaking out of turn here, but there might also be this situation isn't as bad as potentially burning in a tent. So actually, whatever this is resolvable. We can fix this particular thing.
This is the thing, I think. I mean, I've been in long enough now to see. I'm very, very lucky that I've never lost anybody that I've known very well, or sort of. I've seen many people come back. I've been on what they call the ramp ceremonies, when you've been stood there when somebody who's been killed in battle has been sent home. And I've been to what they call the ramp ceremonies, where you stand there to attention and you pay your final respects as the body's flown home. I've seen a lot of that. I've seen quite a bit of nasty injuries in the hospitals and things when I've been filming in there. And I kind of think, do you know what? Nobody died. Then if it isn't the end of the world. But we can, in our minds, we can blow it up, can't we? To this massive, like, oh my God, the world is going to end. And I mean, my other half works in a car garage. I mean, I love him. He's so not like me, and he comes from a completely different world. He works in a car garage. He comes home so stressed at night, and I talk him through it. Nobody died, and he's kind of like, oh my God, I couldn't do all these things. And I'm kind of, in my head, I'm thinking, dude, you wouldn't survive 10 minutes in my job. Then I thought, hang on a minute, that's the Lesley ego talking. You need to take it apart. To him, this is as bad as being stuck in the tent, because that's how he's made it for himself in his mind. So don't be stuck in your mental tent. There's a good title for you.
There you go.
Yeah.
I love that. Don't get stuck. I'm writing it down. Don't get stuck in
your
your
mental
mental
tent.
tent.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to call it. That's what we're going to call the episode. But I think that's but we also have to remember that everybody's job is different, and our worst days might not look the same as your worst day. Might not look as dramaful, but it feels the same. It can have that same emotional impact on us. So whether you are stuck in a tent that's burning, or whether you are stuck in an office environment that's making you feel really unhappy, that kind of sense of gloom is something that you've got to have some tools to deal with. So is it what are my resources? Who do I need to have a conversation with? How can we help each other? How do we be in service of each other and the bigger mission versus our individual outcomes and our individual ego? All of those lessons that you were talking about are all applicable everywhere.
And as you're all about, work joy, finding joy in the moments, and I think that's such a good way to sort of antidote to stress. In that, that's one of the reasons why I was drawn to become the unofficial dog correspondent, is because when you're stuck out in the desert and not very nice and bad things are happening, the military working dog camp has always got a paddling pool, because we didn't have one. The dogs had a paddling pool, we didn't get one. They had to be cooled down. They had to have air conditioned kennels. They had to have regular meals. They had to have a paddling pool. We didn't get that luxury. So I was like, I'm going to go and visit the dogs because I can stroke them, put my feet in their paddling pool if I'm lucky. And just, have a bit of chill time with an animal that will help sort of calm me down, even though it's a vicious, scary patrol dog. When their harnesses are off, they are lovely and you can still pet. You can still pet them. And it's such a morale boost.
Definitely. Oh, so many things so many great lessons. Thank you so much for sharing them. I've got some quick fire questions for you. Are you ready? Quick fire in the sense of not actually firing things at you. You're not being shot at. There are no bombs in this situation. You are not going to need to do a kitten puzzle.
I'm safe. I'm safe.
However, if you want to, feel free. Right. Question 1. For you personally, what is always guaranteed to bring you a little bit of work joy?
I think asking someone else about their day, because you take the pressure off yourself and you listen to someone else's story, and it will always give you a different perspective.
Yeah, great one. And it's so simple as well. It takes zero effort.
Yeah.
As long as you actually listen in and see where it leads you. Oh, love that one. Question 2. What book are you currently reading?
Oh, so I'm a bit weird. I tend to read 2 or 3 at the same time.
Me too. I can't help myself.
I have actually I've just got Happy High Status which is a brand new book that's just been released. I've also got Fast Like a Girl. I'm looking at sort of whether or not intermittent fasting might be a good thing for a menopausal woman in her mid-40s. So I don't tend to read fiction. I only read fiction, funnily enough, when I'm on my adventures. I only got through, I'm slightly ashamed to say this, Jilly Cooper's books, Stuck in Places Like Afghanistan and Africa, where you just need that chapter, that separation between day and bedtime, where I would read the chapter, even if it was the sound of Chinooks flying over my tent or the sound of distant gunfire or whatever it was. I would read a chapter of Rupert Campbell Black Did a Thing. And I would just read that chapter and then I'd put it aside, and all the blokes would take the mick out of me big time. And I'm like, do you know what? I need pink and fluffy, because this is not where I'm stuck, is not pink and fluffy. And so I only ever read fiction when I'm on my adventures, which is a bit weird, I suppose. And when I'm at home, it's all professional development and self-help books. So
yeah, I mean, I'm the same as you. I tend to read mainly non-fiction. And then one of my lovely guests once told me that there's some research that says if you want to sleep better, you should read fiction before bed.
Oh, okay, that sucks a bit.
And I was like, oh. But I have read one fiction book this year, and I've read about 20 non-fiction books. So I think I'm with you, non-fiction. But I like the idea of having your fiction to get away from, like, mentally get away from the situation you're in. Sounds very sensible.
Yeah, it has to be like really, really, really far away. It can't be. I mean, there's actually currently some very good documentaries on at the moment on various TV channels about the work of the military, and I can't watch them. I can't watch them at home in my own. I watch them in the office when I go through them for clearance, but I can't watch them at home because it's that separation for me. So
yeah, I totally get that. What is one super no, hang on, I'm going the wrong question. What is one bit of advice that you have had in your life that you have always find yourself coming back to?
I once had am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
I once had a mentor that said, Lesley, remember that nobody gets out of bed to be an arsehole. So when you are literally like, this person's out to get me, they're being so disrespectful, or they're undermining me, or they just don't get me, or whatever it is, the narrative that you're running in your head, is like literally scratch the record and go, hang on a minute, they didn't get out of bed and think, I'm going to annoy Lesley today. They just, I'm not that important to them. They're important to themselves. So
Exactly.
I think that's a really cool thing to remember.
It is. And to remember that everyone else is just busy living their own lives. Nobody has really, I don't know anyone who has the time or the energy or the inclination to be deliberately bothersome to other humans.
No. And yet we automatically go straight to that place of, they're out to get me, and you just have to sort of calm yourself down and take a few deep breaths, don't you?
It's like, calm down, love. You're not that important.
Yeah, none of us are. Really, none of us are indispensable.
Exactly. Right. And what is one super practical bit of advice that you could give to our listeners, that's something that they could do today, tomorrow, the next day, that you think would help bring them a little bit more work joy in their lives?
So I start with the process. I've been a media trainer for a long time now. So one of the things I do in my job is train other people how to do media interviews, whether that's appearing on telly, giving a radio interview, or even just writing something down for an article or a quote for a newspaper thing. Owning your own story gives you so much joy. If you don't tell your own story and tell it in the way that you want to tell it, somebody else will. It's all about getting in there and owning your own narrative. In that, I was kind of like, do you know what? People could take the mick that I'm not a medic or an engineer, but if I own my story of being third generation woman to join up, and and sort of following in the footsteps of my gran and my mum, and being really proud to do so, even though they had very different jobs to me. It's my story, and I own it, and I talk about it. So before you can kind of go in there and start thinking about, I need to tell the story of my business or the story of the organization that I work for, or come up with my own new brand for a new business that I want to launch. Think about your own story, because people buy people. And if you don't believe your own story, then no one else is going to.
Yeah. I totally support that. In fact, there's a whole chapter on how do you build that story? How do you understand what your story is? How do you unpick the bits that are no longer your story?
Yes.
Chapter 5 in my book.
Yes.
Because that's the thing. Sometimes we're carrying around old stories. We're carrying around previous versions of ourselves, and actually catching up and always thinking about what's the latest version of my story and owning it. That owning it bit is so important. Because you're right. If you don't say it, other people will fill in the gaps and they'll make stuff up.
Well, the thing for me, I think, was hitting my late 40s. So my dad died 3 years ago, and I went through a bit of an existential crisis saying, did I only join the military to make him happy? Discuss in your own little head. And I thought about quitting. I thought about doing something else. Did I really want something else? And the answer was no, I actually quite like this. I'm going to stay. But then when I started coming up with quite sort of debilitating menopause symptoms, it's not easy running around in the military when you've got kind of brain fog and other stuff going on. And I was just open and honest about it. And I went straight to the medical centre to get help. I talked to my bosses, and I talked to anybody that will probably listen, probably a bit too much, bless them. But if I have to become the Davina McCall of the RAF to help other people come after me, then I will. Because there aren't many women in senior positions, and now I understand why. To stay, you see all these older men that have got to sort of very high-ranking positions. But as a woman, you have to go through menopause and all of that other stuff beforehand before you can get there. So I'm like, if I can help, because I'm serving till 60, so I've got another 12 years left effectively to go. But if I can help someone else come after me and have a slightly easier journey because of it, what I call clearing the runway for other people to take off, then it's time well spent.
That's such a good point, isn't it? Because it's a system and organization and jobs that weren't originally designed for women.
Yeah,
that wasn't in their design, and that is going to take some taking things down, building things up, changing the way it works, and somebody's always got to go first. So if you want, I think that's what I'm going to call you from now on, the Davina McCall of the RAF. And that's who you are in my head.
Letting go of old story parts of your story, old chapters. This is a new chapter for me. I don't quite know how it's going to end. But I am very conscious that by spelling it out for other people, it makes it okay for them to talk, and just sort of come forward and go, to see a senior officer say something and they're like, oh, maybe it's okay if I say that I'm struggling a bit too. It's absolutely okay. Please come and chat to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the words of Natasha Bedingfield, the rest is yet unwritten on this particular story.
That song is on my iPod. Yeah.
I love that song. I talk about it all the time and people look at me like, who are you? And I'm like, I don't care. I love that song. I love what it means is that you have the opportunity to write this next chapter and what that looks like.
Yes.
And what you'll be known as is Lesley Davina. You'll just get a middle name.
Maybe I have to check it obviously with her, bless her, first. Obviously,
yeah. Bless her. I think she'd be up for it, because I think she wants to help people. Why not?
Yes,
love it. Right. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. It has been absolutely fascinating, and sharing all of those wonderful things and your career and those amazing stories. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
So I'm mostly on LinkedIn. That's where I go to share my sort of tips and tactics. And I'm all about helping people become more courageously creative in their communications. Also a big fan of alliteration, if you couldn't tell.
I can tell.
So I go on there and often sort of share tips and tricks that I've learned on my adventures in the hope that they might help someone else. So I do share them on there, and please do connect and chat with me on there.
Brilliant. And I have been following you for a while, and there's lots of great tips and tricks that I'm sure lots of people will enjoy. Lesley, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Beth. It's been lovely to chat.
Thank you so much to Lesley Woods for joining me today to talk all about WorkJoy and her experience in the world of the military. So many great bits of advice here. How do we pay attention to things? How do we use our resources that are available to us? How do we all empty our pockets and understand what we've got in terms of our toolkit? How do we seek out mentors and people who've been there before us to help us understand and navigate situations? And also thinking about how do we clear the runway for those future people, for the people who we might need to help dismantle some structures and help rebuild new things that work better for everyone, especially if we're in positions of leadership or being the first. So a huge thank you, Lesley, for talking to me about your amazing stories. And I'm sure we've only just scratched the surface. If you are looking for some help in terms of getting more WorkJoy, a couple of things you can do. I mentioned it in the podcast. We do have the stories chapter in the book, which is available at all good online retailers. WorkJoy, a toolkit for a better working life. And if you head to our website, createworkjoy.com, you'll find there a freebies page, which has our tracker and reflection questions. It's called WorkJoy, Where Do You Get Yours?, which can be really helpful for understanding where you're at right now and what you might want to do next. And also one that's called Fall Back in Love with Your Job. So do go and download those and see what works for you. Thanks for listening.